Hello, my name is Diane Ketley. I'm a member of NHS Horizons, and I'm delighted to be talking today about the challenge of spread and scale, and importantly, what you can do to achieve spread and scale. My background is in the NHS, many decades working originally as a clinical pharmacist and then moving into various fields at local, regional and national level, including the last few years focused very much on the challenge of achieving spread and scale. So, what are we going to cover in the next 15 minutes? I'd like to cover something around the terminology, just to be clear what I mean by what I'm saying. Offer you two key concepts that I hope will help enlighten and deepen your thinking around spread and scale. Explain and outline two available spread resources, explain how they link to the change model and other models, and importantly offer suggestions signposted to other information on this topic. So what does spread mean to you? Can mean lots of different things to different people. So I'll offer here the definitions that I'm using. There are others. These are ones that have been developed in collaboration with others, and they seem to work well. So by spread, this means replicating an innovation or improvement across multiple locations. In practice, the terms spread and scale often blur together and they're used interchangeably. They are defined by some people as something quite specific and different but interrelated, but on the whole, most people, when they're talking about spread and scale, are talking about more or less the same thing. The next set of definitions are adoption and sustainability. And adoption is to put something new into practice that's been used elsewhere. And spread and adoption are two parts of the same activity. If you spread something, somebody's adopting it. So the two ways of looking at the same thing. Linked to this is very important sustainability, and not here the green sustainability, but trying to sustain the benefits, sustain the change, the implementation of the innovation or improvement. The working definition here is sustainability occurs when the new way of working and improved outcomes become the norm. You may continue to evolve, but you don't go back to the old way. So those are the definitions. There's a glossary which we can direct you to if you'd like further details. So that's what we mean by spread. So why do we need to talk about spread and scale? Well, we do, because we might think, well, why? But because we all know it's important. How can we achieve the benefits that we need in the health and social care system if we're not using all the good practice that we know exists? There is knowledge also about what helps or hinders spread. And of course, there's the expectation that it'll just happen. But we also know that it doesn't just happen. It's not as easy. It's not as simple as that. So what is the reality of spread? Well, the reality of spread can be depicted, as you can see here, as isolated islands of improvement. So we all know of really, really good examples of great work of adopting and possibly spreading innovation and improvement, but that doesn't occur across perhaps a whole system, and certainly not across the whole of the country. So that is the reality that we face. There are big opportunities still if we can increase our spread and scale of innovation and improvement. I'd like to offer you two key concepts to help thinking around this topic of spread and scale. And the first one is complexity. The second is influencing behaviour change. And I think these two are really important to understand to then be able to apply and use some of the resources that are available. So the first one, complexity. What is meant by this? Well, the reality of spread is that it's complex. It's not straightforward. It's not simple. It doesn't happen as easily as we might all hope or expect. And that's because there is complexity. There's complexity around the innovation and improvement. Very little of what we're trying to spread is straightforward. It often involves interactions with other organisations, other teams. It in itself can be very complex, and the change that we're trying to spread. We're working in a context that's a complex adaptive system, the health and social care system, so that gives us additional challenge, and therefore the way that we need to go about trying to enable spread to occur has to meet this level of complexity as well. So it's not straightforward. So just in case you're wondering, what do we mean by complexity? A fairly straightforward way is to define what is simple, what is complicated, and what is complex, and look at it by comparison. So what is simple is something that you can follow some rules and you get what you kind of expect. So an example there is baking a cake. You've got a recipe, a set of rules in a set order. If you follow them on the whole, you'll get what you're expecting. Okay, so that's simple. Complicated is simple, but lots of it. So you follow lots and lots of steps, maybe developed over lots of periods of time, requires lots of expertise, isn't straightforward, but on the whole, if you follow these steps, you will again get what you're hoping for. And an example there is sending a rocket to the moon. And this contrasts with complex. An example of something that's complex is raising a child. Here, there are no straightforward recipes or guidelines or steps to follow, clearly things you should and shouldn't do. But on the whole, there are so many factors involved that it's hard to be able to say, do these things and you'll get whatever you're aiming to get. It's very complex, lots of things that are interdependent that are involved in that activity. This shows what we're often, I think, tempted to do in life and in work is choose what is simple. It looks straightforward, maybe easier and quicker to do, but it may actually be wrong for the challenge that you have. And for spread, often taking a simple approach as something that seems straightforward, it isn't the right answer, and actually doing something that is complex to enable spread and scale but may take longer is actually going to in the end produce more likely to produce the results you want. So what do we need to focus on if we're going to embrace complexity? Well, some of the factors or the characteristics are there that we need to be, when we're looking at spread and scale, flexible, adaptive. We have to deal with and embrace the uncertainty, the emergence, the unpredictability. And all of this is underpinned by the great importance of relationships in order to achieve success. Moving on then to the second key concept, that of influencing behaviour change. This is really important, might be stating the obvious, but it's really important to consider in any spread and scale plans, because spread and scale, like change, it's all about the people. A quote here that's just in essence saying change is about the decision made by individual people to change what they're doing, and that's really important for us to remember. You may be familiar with this diffusion of innovation curve. The key message here is that people adopt change at different rates, and people can adopt something very quickly and be very slow to adopt a different change. Some people might be slower at adopting all changes. It really varies, and it varies from person to person, and it varies depending upon the innovation and improvement. And it's important that we know this and we think about it and we build that in to our plans for spread and scale. Some people will adopt things, innovate as early adopters very quickly. Others will take longer, the late majority, and those at the end, laggards or traditionalists, may take an awful long time or may not even embrace that change. So it's bearing in mind that people change at different rates. A really important thing to try and do is to always think, if I'm trying to influence behaviour change, how can I make the change attractive? Why would someone change what they're doing? The why is so important. What's going to be the benefit to them, their patients, their service, their organisation, their team? Why should they change? So it's better to think about how we can make things attractive rather than talking about resistance to change. I think something important is, whatever you're trying to spread and scale, think, how can you make this attractive? Think of the why, the what's in it for me, or for that team, or for that organisation. And there's a really fun video there, worth a quick read, a quick watch if you have time. So influencing behaviour change, we can use the knowledge that's around. Behavioural science can help us as well. And a very good example is described in the blog and the video here, whereby behavioural science and how we can help spread and scale is very clearly and straightforwardly articulated. So, two key concepts. The challenge that we have with spread and scale. So what should we do? It can sometimes get all a bit overwhelming. It's a big problem, a big challenge. How can we do it? Well, we can use what we know to inform our plans for spread and scale. So I'd like to move on to share two particular spread resources with you and outline those. So the two spread resources today are the Leading Spread and Adoption of Innovation and Improvement, a practical guide, often known as the guide, and a more recent Approaches to Spread and Scale set of web pages. These are freely available. The links are there, QR codes. The guide was produced end of 21 and the Approaches to Spread and Scale just a few months ago. Produced by the NHS for the NHS, and so should be relevant and hopefully very useful. So firstly, a guide. Not time in this recording to go through this in lots of detail, but the more info that's provided at the end includes a link to a recording that describes this guide in a lot more detail. But if you go onto the guide landing page, this is what you'll see. There's 6 sections, and I guess the two really key ones are the ones describing 7 interconnected principles for spread and scale, and also a way of leading spread and scale, which is known as systems convening. So to share with you those 7 interconnected principles for spread and adoption, they're shown here. Complexity that we've touched on, leadership, which I'll mention again in a minute, the individuals, benefit, adopter focus, networks, and learning. In the guide, there is a whole section on each of these that goes into detail. In summary, a 1-sentence description of what is meant by these principles is shown here. And these principles are principles. They're not a set of things to do that will guarantee success, but they are things that will likely increase your likelihood of success. And the principles are all interconnected, as you can probably see from the descriptions here. So the second principle I wanted to pull out, we've talked about complexity. The second one is around leadership and how to lead when leading in a complex context and leading something that is a complex change. One way of doing that is to utilise something called systems convening. And systems convening is described in outline here and compared and contrasted to programme management. And what this is showing is that complex change requires both these approaches. It's not that one is better than the other. we need both working together. So program management is particularly good at dealing with situations where there's independence and things are complicated. Systems convening really is a benefit, working with emergence when you're working with complexity and things are interdependent. Again, lots more information on this in the more info section. Moving on to the second resource, this is a set of web pages that offer up the approaches that exist for spread and scale. And what was done was we looked at everything that you can do to help spread and scale happen and pull these together and group them together, and ended up with the groups that are seen here highlighted in the yellow. This infographic is a way of trying to pull the information, lots of information together, hopefully in a visually attractive way. The web pages, the address is there, and within those web pages there are those sets of approaches, 7 groupings of approaches. As you can see there, extends from building capacity and capability through to investing, incentivizing, governing and assuring. So all the things that might be of help. Each approach then has further details, some characteristics, some sort of pros and cons, some examples as well. And just to mention, I think what makes this really valuable as a resource is the fact that it was produced through a collaborative process, pulling together explicit and implicit knowledge from within the organisations and from within the service as well, trying to make something that is very complex as simple as possible. In using approaches for spread and scale, the real art, the real craft is knowing which ones to use when and often in which combination. So we have some examples on the website. This one is showing the use of various different approaches used together to achieve the success in a national spread programme. So, to spread resources, people do ask, well, how do they link together and how do they link to other things? So the spread approaches I see as more strategic, helps identify the general approach to take to enable spread and scale. And then the guide can work alongside that, kind of more maybe operational to inform how to use those approaches. Both can be used separately, or that's how I see them linking together. So how do those link to the change model that you may be familiar with? Well, one of the components of the change model is spread and adoption. So these resources that I've just shared with you fit in there. They are there to help you do that part of the change model. So, in conclusion, I hope you found that useful. If you'd like to know more, there are blogs and videos at the Horizons website there. There's a further information section in the guide. It has a lot of information in there, from blogs to systematic reviews to other videos. So a really good place to go. And if you'd like to contact me, my contact details are there. Many thanks.